Thank you, Luke, for that, and welcome everybody for coming along. Thank you for listening this far anyway, especially for those on the web. Sorry for my voice, it's a bit hoarse. I was out at a do last night and had to shout for about 3 hours. So anyway, the Transfiguration is the homily, is the topic today, and I've passed out actually to those who are here a copy of the account of the Transfiguration according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So if you folks at home want to get your own Bibles out, you might like to consult at least Mark's version, which is rather early in the Gospel. So that would be a good place to start, just to have that around. So, or Matthew's version, chapter 17 in Matthew, or if you want to go to Mark's version, that should be, do you know Luke? Oh yeah, chapter 9 of Mark. Thank you. So, the readings presented to us during Lent are meant to be an encouragement to us and help us make the most of Lent. And today's Gospel of the Transfiguration should encourage us greatly. As you know, we read of it in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and each presented in their own way. And I hope you don't mind just taking a look at a rather detailed way of looking at them for the beginning, and later on we'll look at John's version, and then we'll see how the teaching of these writers influenced our creed, which we recount on Sundays very often. And then how it influences us individually, what hope it gives us individually, how it encourages us individually. So that's what we'll do. That's the plan I'm going to have, all right? So we start with a simple one, Mark. And it's a turning point in the Gospel. Immediately after Peter's confession of faith and the first prophecy of the Passion. It takes place on a mountain. That's the usual site for revelations, theophanies. And the Greek term metamorphosis is actually used to indicate that the form or the appearance of Jesus was changed. That's the same word as is used in the hymn of the Philippians, where Christ is said to have been in the form of God. And the three disciples receive a glimpse of this divine nature. So, you'll also notice, if you have it in front of you, that Elijah and Moses, who represent the traditions of prophecy and the law, appear alongside Jesus, and thus witness to Jesus' role in fulfilling the law and the prophets. They too, Moses and Elijah, both suffered in their missions, and Jesus was about to do so. And we're told it was a cloud overshadowing them. A cloud in the Middle East is a symbol of life and hope. It suggested rain that sustains life, and also it came to signal divine presence. In the book of Exodus, you'll remember, a cloud covered the tent of meeting, which is filled with the glory of God. So suggestive. And then a voice came from this cloud and identified Jesus. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Reiterating the same words of his baptism. You are my beloved Son, in you I take delight. So that's Mark. As regards Matthew's version, he adds to and subtracts from Mark's version. For example, if you have it in front of you, Matthew adds that Jesus' face shone like the sun. This would recall to the good Jewish reader the fact that Moses' face shone brightly after his encounter with God on Mount Sinai, and that a veil had to be put over it Jesus is thus being presented a little like in the tradition of Moses, as the new Moses. In the Transfiguration scene, according to Matthew, while describing Jesus' garments, Matthew omits the banal reference to bleach that Mark included. That detracts from the awesomeness of the scene. Later on, with similar effect, Matthew changes the title by which Peter addresses Jesus from Master, Mark, to Lord. Lord is Kyrios in Greek, and that term often has an exalted meaning and is used throughout the Greek version of the Old Testament to refer to God. So it means speaking of God without mentioning the most holy name, Yahweh. To address Jesus as Kyrios, as Lord, is already hinting at his divinity. Matthew also adds to Mark's version that it's a bright cloud which overshadows the onlookers. It contributes to the divine connotations of the scene, and he adds that Peter, James, and John fell on their faces. This too is a stock signal for the presence of the divine. So the cute reader is getting a lot of signals here. We see, therefore, that Matthew's vision is much more awe-inspiring, evoking the hidden divinity of Jesus. It has now become visible, and it recalls the otherness of the one true God, the foundation of Judaism. You probably all know the foundation statement of Judaism, Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema. Listen, Israel, there's only one God. So, now turning to Luke, the third version, we note the Transfiguration scene here is explicitly in the context of prayer, not mentioned in the other ones. Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his countenance was altered. By this, Luke makes clear that the Transfiguration rendered visible what really happened to Jesus in prayer, a sharing in the splendor of God. It was a revelation of the divinity of Christ in being a manifestation of the mystery of his sonship. His communication with the Father becomes visible during the Transfiguration. And this intimate relationship always characterized Jesus' prayer. You will recall his use of the name Abba for God. It surpasses every possible mode of prayer known at that time. It expresses a kind of familiarity with God, which in the Jewish tradition would have appeared impossible and inadmissible. In this one word alone is expressed the outstanding mode of relationship of Jesus to God. That relationship for which only the word Son is the proper expression. In all Jesus' words and actions, this relationship of Son shines out. His whole being is taken up in it. Jesus speaks and acts not of himself, but by the working of another from whom he comes. Luke also incorporates a second element explicitly in his version of the Transfiguration, that Moses and Elijah were speaking about his departure, his crucifixion, which he was to accomplish in Jerusalem. Luke thus places suffering and death, suffering on the cross, in the middle of the vision of glory. It testifies to all the events of the passion and death as part of God's plan. In fact, there's a lot of resemblance between the scenes of the Transfiguration and that of the crucifixion. On Golgotha, Jesus was flanked by two criminals. Here we see him flanked by Moses and Elijah, representing the law and the prophets. They, by their very presence, witness to the fact that the passion and the way of the cross is God's plan. Transfiguration and crucifixion contrast. One is all light, and in the other, darkness covered the land. The Transfiguration is a private epiphany for those closest to Jesus. The crucifixion is a public spectacle and humiliation. In the scene of the Transfiguration, we see a silhouette of the crucifixion. The Gospel is telling us that the life of glory is intimately connected with the cross. I think, anyway, that's what I think. Now, in all three Gospel versions, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we learn of a major element, the voice from the cloud, saying, "This is my Son, listen to him." The identification is the same in all three Gospels, and it's the same as in the baptism, where Jesus was identified as my beloved Son. And similarly, thirdly, at the crucifixion, he is identified by the centurion in Mark's Gospel as, in truth, he was Son of God. And listen to him. By that voice, we have approval of Jesus as the revealer, as the representative of God. It's the voice from the cloud. Now, having viewed those three, I think it would be good to backtrack a little bit, because we're begging a question, see? And it might kind of pull the rug under everything. Because we have to recognize, and you people probably recognize for sure, that to understand any piece of writing, you have to know what literary genre it's in. You'll recall from other scenes, like, well, okay, the funny one is, was there really a serpent in the Garden of Eden who was able to speak in Hebrew? And so if you took the first chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis, literally you'd actually find there's a snake which is able to speak in Hebrew. Like, this is not real. And then you get other more tempting questions, like when Moses was on the mountain and he received the 10 Commandments, did God really write them out in Hebrew on a piece of rock? Or is this a way of communicating something which isn't to be taken literally true? So you have to decide the genre. And this case too, Transfiguration. Is it really true? So we're going to just backtrack on that. And scholars have come up with at least 3 possible genres for the Transfiguration. Historical report, like news item. Resurrection appearance. An apocalyptic vision. Or maybe none of the above. So many people, and myself until recently, just started working on this, inclined to believe the Transfiguration scene to be more or less a historical report. It happened. Perhaps not every detail is to be taken literally true, but at any rate, it's understood as a historical experience, albeit unique, and one which allowed some apostles, just 3, perceive the glory, the hidden divine nature of Jesus. But there are elements in the account which are hard to believe them as historically true. For example, The appearance of Moses and Elijah, they were well dead. And anyway, where is there a high mountain in and around Galilee? No, they're just big hills. No high mountain. And some interpreters are consider the Transfiguration to be in fact an appearance of the risen Christ. That's the second genre, a resurrection appearance. And that the event has simply been transferred, backed up, to an early stage of Jesus' life in and around Galilee. The appearance would fit in well with other New Testament descriptions of the risen Christ. Just consult the other ones. Acts 9:3, 22:6, 26:13. They're on the piece of paper. This is certain, it has certain credibility. The resurrection gives a context to understand the changed appearance of Jesus. And that appearance can explain the disciples' amazement. But the story lacks the theme of mission, which is central to all the other resurrection appearances. Thirdly, some commentators consider the Transfiguration to belong to the genre of apocalyptic vision. As a genre, this is hard to define, but it typically means there's a vision and that it involves secret knowledge for which a special interpreter is required, and it concerns the future reign of God. Examples of this are found in the books of Daniel and Zechariah, which make great reading, actually. Okay? Now, the Transfiguration event is indeed explicitly described as a vision in Matthew. He uses the word chorama, and all the Transfiguration accounts use this word. And the scenes provide a preview of Jesus as a major character in the future coming of God's kingdom. But there's no first-person narrative like I saw in my dream a vision in the night. No angelic interpreter or a secret interpretation of the vision. We must conclude, therefore, that no known literary genre fully suits the event of the Transfiguration of Jesus. So one is left wondering how to reliably interpret it. It seems to be modeled on a theophany experienced by Moses in the Old Testament on Mount Sinai. There are common features: high mountain, radiance from the central figure, fear among onlookers, a cloud, a voice from a cloud. So we might settle on calling it a Christophany, which what emerges from the combination of the genres are 2 points. Firstly, the overwhelming brilliance of the person of the real Jesus and a manifestation of who Jesus Christ really was. And secondly, the mystery of the presence of the cross, an appreciation of Jesus' death and resurrection as pivotal for the coming of God's kingdom. Then there's the call to listen to him, and that highlights the proper response to Jesus and points to the cost of the suffering inherent in discipleship. That's a most suitable reading. Now, in deepening our understanding of the Transfiguration, we shouldn't overlook the Gospel of John, which indeed has been described as a perpetual theophany. There is in fact no specific scene of the Transfiguration in John's Gospel, precisely because the divine presence can be read on every page. One theologian, Ernst Kaisman, describes his experience of John's Gospel as that of God striding over the earth. One is only to recall the prologue's presentation of Jesus as a pre-existent divine being, whose real home is in heaven. On the one hand, in John, Jesus is omniscient, He sees Nathanael under the fig tree. He knows the thoughts of others. He has knowledge of where he has come from, where he's going. He even, you might say, orchestrates his own crucifixion or the trial scene before the crucifixion. He knows everything that was to happen to him and then came forward. Right through to the end, when we read, he said something, so that the scriptures should be completely fulfilled. He said, I am thirsty. So, complete command to what was going on. But very importantly, in our consideration of the Transfiguration, we note that John's Gospel centers precisely on Jesus as Son, on his relationship with the Father. He is the agent of the Father in the world. This is expressed by the simple expression Son or Beloved Son, and not by Son of Man or Son of God. It's the single word Son, which is the climax of all three synoptic versions of the Transfiguration, when the voice names Jesus as Son. And by that title, and that title is rarely used in the synoptics. Only 3 times, but each time significantly. And the first 2 times on Jesus' lips, stressing the intimate relationship between Son and Father, and once by St. Paul in 1 Corinthians. St. John's Gospel there, is drawing out the full meaning of the synoptic usage of the word Son, a word used by Jesus in presenting his relationship to God the Father. There is a passage in John's Gospel which well represents the nature of this relationship to the Father. It's the discourse Jesus makes after curing the sick man at Bethsaida. It was accepted in Judaism that God has the right to work on the Sabbath. For example, in giving life. Babies are born on the Sabbath. And in judging. People die on the Sabbath. Jesus claims this right for himself in saying, my Father goes on working, and I am working too. That's a Sunday. It is a claim suggesting that his work is in tandem with God, and he has an equality with God. The claim then expands by 2 phrases. Firstly, quotation, by himself the Son can do nothing, but he can do only what he sees the Father doing. And whatever the Father does, the Son does too. And then, by the phrase, I seek to do not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. The scene envisages that of a father and son engaged in the same trade. We can recall that a Jewish father was obliged to teach his son a trade in the same workshop. And when they have worked together for some time, the master can leave the pupil to carry out or finish a piece of work. They share the same skills and the same approach. So now, besides Jesus' omniscience in John's Gospel and his sonship, we also find the concept in John's Gospel of glory, kabod in Hebrew. Jesus reveals the glory of the Father, which is at the same time his own glory. Now, glory in the Old Testament is an awesome concept. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, they tried to translate this word, and there wasn't a word for it. So they adapted the word doxa, which normally means good reputation, or popular estimation, or what people think of you. Doxa was used to translate the Hebrew word kabod. And we read in Exodus 33, Moses said to the Lord, I pray thee, show me thy glory. Kavod. Kavod in the Hebrew and doxa in the Greek. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, but you cannot see my face. For man shall not see my face and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand upon a rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I'll take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face you shall not be seen. Glory is what makes God awesome and unapproachable and utterly different. From too long prolonged association with the glory of God on Mount Sinai, the skin on Moses' face, you remember, became so radiant that people were afraid to go near him. Had to put a veil over his face. Similarly, in the vocation scene in Isaiah chapter 6, the impression of glory is created by billowing clouds, the train of Yahweh, filling the sanctuary, and it makes Isaiah fall to the ground, aware only of his own unworthiness. We find this response to Yahweh in the book of Isaiah expressed forcefully in the poem of Isaiah chapter 2, whose refrain is, go into the rock, hide in the dust, in terror of Yahweh, as the brilliance of his majesty, when he arises to make the earth quake. This holy terror makes the prophets and all who encounter God fall abject to the ground, like we saw in our scene today. In the synoptics, the reactions occur when this reaction occurs when Jesus is walking on the water. And when Peter in Luke says, depart from me, Lord, I am a sinner. And above all, in the reaction of the women at the empty tomb, when they experience God's power breaking out in the resurrection and flee in terror. It is the basis of the Jewish refusal to pronounce the name of God. And just to finish this theme of glory in John's Gospel, it is indicated from the beginning of the prologue. The evangelist writes that we saw his glory, awesomely summing up this abiding theme of Jesus' presence among them. And he adds that this is the glory which he has from the Father, as the only Son of the Father. It's a perception of Jesus' divine nature. Is my timing right? Okay. How much more time? 5 minutes? Go around. That's fine. Now, the climax of the first miracle of Cana, is given when he showed his glory, in the Greek, the doxa, and his disciples believed in him. Belief is related to the sight of the glory. It must somehow be an experience of the divine quality of Jesus. The divine is seen to be shining through. It is his glory and directs one's attention to his divinity. Now that's the first part of my talk, is a closer look at the Gospels. But let's see what is intimated of the divinity of Christ is actually parallel to, consonant with, the Christological dogma, with what we proclaim in the creeds. In the preceding section, we have limited ourselves to the testimony of the Gospels. What we have found is that the supreme title for faith of Jesus is Son. It corresponds exactly to the historical image of him in those scriptures. The center of his life was his permanent contact with the Father in the intimacy of his prayer. The understanding of Christ expressed in this title, Son, is ultimately a theology of prayer. But now we should take a step further, proceeding to the Christology of the dogma, the church teaching, that of the great councils, Nicaea, Constantinople, Chalcedon. The key word of the councils is homoousios, of the same substance, homoousios, already included in the Creed in the year 325, Nicaea, and at the Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. In this word, homoousios, the council expressed its synthesis of Hebrew and Greek thought on salvation. And Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, has written that what has been said about this biblical word son is equally included in the word homoousios, used in the creed that you say. Light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. He writes that this new word, homoousios, introduced to the creed, in the final analysis, is nothing other than an interpretation of the life and death of Jesus, which were continuously determined by his communion with the Father. So, you see, the biblical and the dogmatic theology are consonant. They're not divided, they're not opposed, they're saying the same thing. High and low Christology, the theology of the Incarnation, theology of the cross, form an inseparable unit. One whole unit, no division in it. Or in other words, the central term of the dogma, the consubstantial Son, one with the Father, in which is summed up all the testimony of the other councils, simply translates the fact of the prayer of Jesus. It translates it into philosophical and theological language. However, this is the tricky part, the impression frequently remains that the dogmatic statements leave us with a certain parallelism between the two natures of Christ. But in fact, the declaration of the true humanity, on the one hand, and the true divinity of Christ, is only meaningful when there is a clarification as to the mode of the two natures, human and divine, defined by Chalcedon as one person. So Christ is not two persons, one person, two natures, one person. In fact, only that unity of divinity and humanity, which in Christ is not parallelism, where one stands alongside the other, but real co-penetration, as Pope Benedict says. Co-penetration between God and the human. And it's only then that there can be salvation for humanity. Only in this way does being with God become real for human beings. And this issue turned up at the Third Council of Constantinople in 680, after 2 centuries of dramatic struggle linked to political struggles in the Byzantine Empire. According to the council, on the one hand, the unity between the divinity and humanity of Christ does not in any sense imply a reduction or amputation of his humanity. If God joined himself to his creature, to humanity, he does not injure or diminish it, but brings it to a greater fullness. There remains no parallelism or dualism of two natures. The assumption of the human will into the divine does not destroy its freedom, but only generates it. It's a little hair-raising, but let's go. The Council of Constantinople analyzed the problem of the two natures and the one person in Christ. It recalled that there exists a specific will of the man, Jesus, that is not absorbed into the divine will. But this human will follows the divine will and then becomes a single will with it. There is a fusion of the two, created by love and corresponding to the unity of the Trinity. It is shown in the saying of the Lord, "I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me." With Jesus, there are not two I's, two I identities, but only one. Jesus' I has been assumed into the I of the Son of God, because the human will has become fully one with the will of the Son, and with it has become pure assent to the will of the Father. Benedict, Pope Benedict, goes further to say that the divine Logos stoops down to assume as his own the will of humankind, and speaks to the Father with the I of humankind. He transforms the word of the baptized person into the eternal word, into his own yes to the Father. While giving to a person his own I, his own identity, like each of us, the Logos saves the person and divinizes him or her. As Pope Benedict says, the Son transforms the anguish of any person into the obedience of the Son of God. He transforms the speech of a mere servant into the words of the Son. It's in this unity of wills that lies the greatest possible transformation for any person, for any of us. And it is effectively divinization. This is prayer. And in no other place occurs such a profound change in a person. This becoming like God, becoming part of God, being divinized, is the theme of the recent publication on the writings of Blessed Columba Marmion. So this is a sales spot, okay? Becoming divine. Becoming human, becoming divine. The writings of Columba Marmion. So that's the whole theme of that book, which I read with great interest. Now, so we read in it, page 25, Christ is the Son of God by nature and by right, in virtue of the union of the eternal Word with the human nature. But we are so by adoption and grace. And we are truly, really so. The divine life is infused into us at baptism. And it is this way that we can accomplish all our actions divinely. Because the inward principle is divine. When dominant in our lives, we can say with St. Paul, I live, that is to say, I exercise my human and personal activity. Now, not I, but Christ lives in me. We share in the identity of Christ, and he shares his hidden glory with his saints. As it says in 1 John 3:2, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he really is. Such is the perspective opened up for us by the event of the Transfiguration of Christ. It is, in fact, a preview of our own transfiguration in him. We become, by God's gift, what Christ is by his nature, human and divine. It is the whole thrust of the teaching of Columba Marmion. Finally now, let us return to the final words of the Transfiguration. Listen to him. As they contained an injunction for Peter, James, and John, so do they for us. They are pronounced after the prophecy of the Passion, and with the second such prophecy soon to follow. Jesus then takes the path to crucifixion in Jerusalem. The Transfiguration scene is to strengthen the disciples for the shock, the scandal, and the suffering that is to happen there. It will sustain them in the faith that Jesus is Lord, Kyrios. As wrote St. Leo the Great, the entire mountain episode is as a source of strength for those who later must go the way of the cross. And St. Augustine draws the same conclusion when he comments satirically on Peter's intention to construct 3 tents for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. He says, "Come down, Peter, proclaim the word, keep it in season and out of season, convict, admonish, work, perspire, endure torture, come down the mountain in order to work on earth, to serve on earth, to be crucified on earth. Life comes down to be killed. Bread comes down to be used up. The way comes down to be exhausted. The spring comes down to run dry. And you refuse to work? Do not seek what is yours. Have love. Proclaim the truth. Then you will come to eternity. There you will find certainty." So let me conclude now by saying that Lent is the opportunity for us to resume our journey to live well as disciples of Christ. We are strengthened by the experience of the Transfiguration. It prefigures the life we have to come, and it asserts that life is already in fact here, though hidden. Christ is our model, the promise of our future glory. As it says in the book of Daniel, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father.